Now it's my pleasure to introduce our second keynote speaker, Nick Pinchuk, CEO of Snap-on. Snap-on is based in Kenosha, Wisconsin. It's a $4 billion company, really a world leader in making tools. And there isn't a more eloquent CEO in the country when it comes to the issue of the dignity of work, the importance of CTE, and how we can prepare more kids for success. So I'd like to introduce our next keynote speaker, Mr. Nick Pinchuk.
Thank you. I figured if they'd take the podium down, it'd make me look taller, I'd feel better. Note to self, never schedule yourself after Catherine Leong. Big mistake. Big mistake. Look, it's my great pleasure to be here at the Pathways Conference. I have to thank Bill for that kind of hyperbolic introduction. But I am quite privileged to be here because I believe it's so important. I believe America is the greatest country in the world, but we are challenged right now. And that challenge emanates from the idea that we're in a global competition for jobs. And our most important weapon in that competition is education in general, CTE in particular, and the upskilling of the American workforce specifically. It is, in fact, the seminal issue of our time. There is none more important, none. So, what you do, what all of you do, has never, ever, ever been more important. If your ambition and your aspiration was to do something that was important to your neighbors, important to our nation, then you were at the right place and the right time, and there is abundant evidence all around us that this is so. I'm from Snap-on. We're tool makers. We're kind of proud of it. But let me tell you how we come here, and it's worthwhile. Just suffer me a story for a moment. We were founded in 1920, and there are 300 million vehicles on the road today in North America. But in 1920, there were 7.5 million vehicles. And what that means is, the auto industry was just starting, and mechanics, nobody knew what mechanics were supposed to be doing, what tools they had, or what kind of skills they needed, or where they sat on the totem pole of technical capability. And comes an engineer from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and he gets an idea. Take 5 handles of different configurations, an ellipse, a crank, a T, and so on, and put them together with 10 sockets of different dimensions and fashion them so they snap on interchangeably. It was an innovation that revolutionized tool sets all over this country, and it made work easier up and down repair shops. He did something else. He made these tools of the greatest steel. I'm telling you, we have some of the old ones. There's some of the originals, and when you pick them up and you imagine that you're in 1920 and you feel it, you feel, in somewhat paraphrasing how I might have described this when I was in Vietnam, you would have said, this is built like a brick structure. If you know what I mean. All right. But he did something else. Here's what he did that I think is relevant to what I'm going to say today and has shined the light for us all these years. He told his salesmen to go into the shops and take those 5 handles and 10 sockets and lay them out on green felt, as if they were as precious as surgeons' knives, implying that if the mechanic used these Snap-on tools, he would declare to the world he was doing something special, perhaps as special as a surgeon. And the idea that Snap-on tools is the outward sign of pride and dignity stays with us today. In fact, our company, all these 9 decades, more than 95 years now, has been dedicated to the timeless principle of the pride and dignity of work. And we have been enlisted in making work easier for serious people who are trying to solve critical problems, a cause which is, as timely today as it was all those decades ago. And to do this, we're in shops all the time. I spend a lot of time in auto repair shops myself, but not only auto repair shops, aviation places where they repair jet engines, oil and gas platforms, you name it, in terms of wherever critical work is done. And it's served us well. Now we're in 130 countries around the world. You know, we have 34, if you see Snap-on trucks, we have 3,476 of them riding around the country. I have that number written on my shorts. I see it every morning. And then we have thousands of direct salesmen. We are in 700,000 repair shops. We are in 2,500 schools where technical education is dispensed. We have 65,000 products. We have 28 factories around the world, 8 of which are here in the United States, and I'm proud to say that 80% of what's sold off those vans in the United States is made right here in America. And a hand tool is 50% labor. Sometimes check how much labor there is in a TV or a phone. I think you'll find it isn't anything like 50%. Yet we're able to do this, and this is the point I want you to hold on to because I'm going to reference it later. We do this because we know who we are. We're the people who make the difficult easier, the difficult easier, the critical, the complex simpler, the critical reliable, and everyday work special. The outward sign of pride and dignity. And because we've known this, it has allowed us to go on and grow. It's important to know who you are. I'm going to come back to that. You know, Bill gave you the kind of thumbnail CV for me, but I'm going to tell you something other people may not know about me. I delivered my own daughter in the back seat of a car in an A&P parking lot at 4:30 in the morning. And the only training I had for that, I wish I had technical education on my side at that time. The only training I had was watching Ben Casey. You remember Ben Casey? You know, right? Okay, so I'm in the back seat of the car and I'm lifting this little girl by her ankles and I clear her air passages and I hit her on her rear end like Ben Casey did and I hear her breathe her first breath and make her first sound. And in those days, you know, science wasn't what it was today and we didn't know the gender of the baby. So my wife asked me, is it a boy or a girl? So in the back seat of the car in the A&P parking lot at 4:30 in the morning in the dark, I was fooled by the umbilical cord. It's a true story. I said, boy, you know, I recovered from that. You know. Anyway, it's all true. Unfortunately, or fortunately, that girl's a little older today and she has 3 children of her own. But look, I don't want to go further without saying this. We do business in 130 countries around the world, and I travel to many of them in service of Snap-on, and I can tell you without equivocation, without qualification, without question, that the United States, regardless of what you hear on TV, is still the greatest country in the world. I guarantee it to all of you. We have more comfort, greater mobility, and a wider range of opportunity than any country in the history of this planet. And if you doubt that, ask the 14.7 million people who are lining up to get green cards. That's 7 times more than any other country in the world. They somehow think this is the greatest country in the world, and it is. Now, I'm the first to say, these are interesting times, huh? How about this election? Whoa, whack-a-mole, huh? And so, okay, you know, if you're on TV or you're reading, you see things like, I mean, these are candidates saying this. We're a third world country. Everybody in the United States is skimping. They're on the edge. They're living on the edge. And the New York Times is saying, we're not number one. They got a headline, we're not number one. We're not number one. Well, yeah, actually, we have challenges going forward. It's unclear where we're going. It's unclear what the path is forward. But I can tell you as a guy who runs businesses and run them for years, when things get unclear and you're looking forward, everything everybody says sounds like a good idea to somebody. I'm telling you, that's what happens. And you can see it in the election. And part of what happens here is you forget who you are. And the best thing to do, I think, is to come back to who you are. That's what's always worked for us. We come back to the idea we make the difficult easier, the complex simpler, the critical reliable, and everyday work special. And who is the United States in these terms? Well, I'll tell you, historians are not confused. David Landon's a Harvard historian. Paul Kennedy from Yale and Neil Ferguson from NYU all agree on this. The United States was ascendant among all countries. Think about this. We're ascendant among all countries in the New World, and we are the greatest country in the world. And why is this? It's because our population, broadly described, across the nation, knew how to create things and make them work. This is what we do, and it is what we have always done. Think back to it. We had brilliant people. We had really smart people. We had George Washington and Lincoln and Roosevelt and Henry Ford and Edison and Tesla. A whole bunch of people, inventors and leaders. So we had brilliant ideas. But those ideas never could have become anything. Lincoln could have never prosecuted or defended the Union. Other people, Edison couldn't have done what he did without the efforts of the many. Think of Henry Ford. Henry Ford had a great idea, but he couldn't have taken his idea to fruition without amplifiers. And back in the early parts of the 20th century, he chose the greatest commercial amplifier of its day, the American workforce. Dedicated, committed, energetic. And together they created the American auto industry, one of the greatest industries ever conceived. Henry Ford got rich. He should have. But along the way, he and the people who were with him, the amplifiers who were with his idea, created lives of prosperity and dignity and pride for them and their descendants. And this saga, this example, played out across this nation from sea to shining sea, over and over and over again. Our company's an example of it, right back from that 5 do the work of 50, those 5 handles and the 10 sockets. And that all worked. The idea, and the concept here is using everyone, using a large population to create and make things work. This is America. And it's also other people. Japan learned how to do this. After World War II, Japan rose based on this. Now, you may not think this. I lived in Asia 11 years myself, and I can tell you one of the bases for the Japan rise was this. You may have heard it: continuous improvement, or lean, or kaizen. And what all that means is they figured out that they would tap the power of their middle. And they did. And they created a society they couldn't imagine. And China's doing the same thing now, tapping the power of their middle, bringing people into factories, making them better. Because manufacturing isn't the only endeavor, but it's one of the ones that does use the power of the middle. For every manufacturing jobs, 4.5 more are created. For every dollar spent on manufacturing, another $1.40 is spent someplace else. So it's a great way to engage the middle. Now, where are we today on this? Well, let's look at the paper again. The New York Times says, the American middle is an endangered species. The Wall Street Journal says, the American middle is squeezed. And my personal favorite, the Washington Post says, the American middle class lost in space. Danger, Will Robinson. So you have this. So you ask yourself, what is wrong? What happened to the brilliance of the few and the efforts of the many, and why isn't that generating the benefits anymore? And I have a couple of things. First is, the middle class is shrinking? My answer to those people who ask that question is, no kidding, Sherlock. 30% of manufacturing jobs have disappeared in the last 20 years. And how have we replaced them? We've replaced them with something broadly described as transactional things, financial services, the velocity of money. Now, the velocity of money is great stuff. It generates prosperity, but that prosperity tends to be concentrated in relatively fewer. It doesn't take advantage of this sound familiar, by the way? It tends to be concentrated in relatively fewer. And oh, by the way, it is subject to bubbles. Transactional business is subject to bubbles. If you don't believe that, ask the Dutch, Amsterdam, 1637. In 1637 in Amsterdam, you could buy a house with this money, or you could take that money and buy one tulip bulb. Tulip bulbs had risen to the point they were valued equal to a house. 1638, 1 year later, worthless. Sounds like credit default swaps in America in 2009. So I have nothing, there's nothing wrong with financial services, don't get me wrong, but it's difficult to replace the great middle's activity with that effect. And that's what we had done. So how do we restart the great middle? What's wrong? Why do the brilliance of the few and the efforts of the many not work anymore? It must be the ideas. We don't have as many ideas as before. Well, actually, if we look around, we see Apple phones, we see the F-35 plane, we see fracking. Sounds like the ideas are there. And if you look at Nobel Prizes, of the 913 Nobel Prizes awarded since it began in, 1901, 38% were awarded to Americans. You guys are worried about the Chinese. Well, of the 10 Nobel Prizes that were awarded to ethnic Chinese, more than half were U.S. citizens. Now, America won 38% of those Nobel Prizes. Number 2 is UK, 13%. And you might say we're building up a lead, we're coasting. You know, like we built up a lead and it's the fourth quarter and we're coasting. But that's not true, because since 2001 we've won 41%, more than the average. So the ideas are there. It's the workforce. The unions have screwed up things. It's really, American workers, no good. Compared to everybody. That's not true. If you walk the floors of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, or Murphy, North Carolina, or Algona, Iowa, or Elizabethton, Tennessee, or Elkmont, Alabama, or City of Industry, California, I see the same energy and dedication and commitment I imagine Henry Ford saw all those decades ago. But the problem is this. When you walk the floor in Minsk in Belarus, and Delhi in India, or Santo Tome in Argentina, or Shanghai in China, you see the same dedication and energy and commitment. So those so American of virtues are no longer differentiating in the competition to be the commercial amplifier of the ideas of today, and we're losing some of those competitions. Now, the way to answer that is to make sure our workforce is more skilled than the other ones. That's how Snap-on makes product in the United States. We make a complex product, and our workforce is more skilled. That's what's needed. The upskilling of American workers, the career and technical education, it has never been more important. It is the seminal issue of our day. And despite the fact this is interesting, despite the fact the middle class is shrinking, there are 600,000 jobs going begging right now because we can't find the skills. And the National Association of Manufacturers says that's going to go to 3.4 million in the next decade. And that same group, its membership, which is 14,000 strong, 67%, two-thirds say the number one reason to locate a plant is skilled workforce. Anybody who's located a plant in China will tell you that's absolutely true. The ones that spit up blood are the ones that you went to the wrong place, it wasn't the workforce. So the idea, what you do, career and technical education, the upskilling of the workforce has never been more important. However, as you might deduce, we have all the people working on it. Why isn't it working better? I have some idea, just a humble advice from me that I think many of you would share this advice. First is we need to match, much of what the governor said actually, and much of what you'd say, we need to match the curriculum with what's actually needed. We need to call in the airstrikes, in effect. And, that's easier said than done. I think academic, education would like not necessarily to receive ideas from business, and business doesn't necessarily understand that it needs to get involved, but it does. There are lots of organizations that do this. Snap-on is involved in one, the National Coalition of Certification Centers. We're partnering with a number of people here, but Wes Meck is one. Greg Donovan here, who has worked with us on this and created stackable certifications which say that these students know how to do this in a way in which industry values. So far, that organization has passed out 57,000 certificates to 31,000 students, and they have 297 schools involved. I recommend you investigate it. It's an important idea. Now, out of this emanates a question for you, though. I think what's important about this is if we are people involved in education, if we're thinking about education, are we thinking about the individual student and is the goal an education or a career? Are we thinking of the pathway or the education? I suggest the answer has to be career. Arma virumque ab Troia ad Roma. That's the first line of the Aeneid in Latin, and that in a nickel will get me a pack of gum. But it has enriched my life, but not helped my career. So I suggest we need people to try to guide that and make sure we understand exactly what curriculum is needed. Secondly, and more difficult, career and technical education, the careers we represent, or I represent certainly by being in these shops so much, is got a heck of a PR problem. You think I'm kidding? I'm not. Technical careers, welding, machine programming, car mechanics, are viewed as, people who do that are viewed as having settled for the consolation prize of our society. This is what Pathways is somewhat about, to wipe out that stigma, that idea. Because these are jobs which keep your family warm and safe and dry and generate pride and dignity. You know, I often speak in Washington about this, so I'm at a major magazine, I won't mention the magazine, so I'm at this magazine, I'm talking to its staff and a number of people, they have a colloquium there, and I say to the audience this stuff about consolation prize, and the audience is bristling, saying I'm wrong. So I asked them a question I'm going to ask you, and I'll tell you what the reaction was in Washington. The question is, how would you feel if your son or daughter, niece or nephew, announced to you he wanted to be a welder at Snap-on? And you could have heard a pin drop in that room because they knew the answer to that question. This is the type of job other people's kids do. Yet, Liberty Street Economics, a scion of the Federal Reserve, gives out data, and it says, yes, the average university graduate makes a lot more money than the average high school graduate, right? We've seen this data. But did you ever stop to think that that's the average? And Warren Buffett is in that number, right? Warren Buffett's in the number. So that kind of skews it, I think, a little bit, huh? So if you look at the bottom 25% of university graduates, they make no more money. And certainly people who have technical certifications or degrees, they make a lot more money than just the average high school graduate. So these are jobs that are terrific. The Darling of Washington, a book that was the Darling of Washington about 2 years ago, was Tyler Cohen's Average is Over. He basically said in there, the American dream is gone. And I know people say the American dream is slipping away, but let me give you my view is, the American dream is not slipping away. It is that we have redefined it. We've defined it as you achieve the American dream if you become a TV anchor, a governor, a CEO, a college professor, an attorney, or a physician. That was never the American dream. The American dream has always been you keep your family warm and safe and dry, and you have pride and dignity, and I assure you there is pride and dignity and prosperity in the auto repair shops of America. There is, believe me. We deal with them every day, and we can see the pride that they feel. There's an article in the New York Times, just Sunday magazine, I don't know if you saw it. It's moving on up. And the whole thing is talking about the middle class. It's a great, you ought to read it. It's got a bunch of articles about this. But one that I really loved, it says, moving on up, and it said, one of the reasons why we don't value these jobs is because we used to have them on TV. Sitcoms used to demonstrate aspiration and success and failure of everyday people. They're no longer on TV. They're no longer our role models. And it's true if you think about it. Tyrion Lannister is not repairing cars. You know, he's from the Game of Thrones. I thought maybe people would know that. But anyway, the other thing about this is, I know we have a lot of energy around career counseling, and this is one of the things we need here. We need not career guidance, career counseling that gets people, that moves people into, that understands clearly these differences and sees these jobs for what they are. Great deliverers of our society. After all, These jobs represent the efforts of the many, and they've created the society, the very society by which we benefit from today, from which we benefit today. Then there's one final point. We need to differentiate the difference between endorsement and support. You know, I can get any senator, any congressman to say, I assure you, I can get him right here, and I can get him to say, in his office or right here, CTE, terrific, terrific, wonderful. I endorse it. But when push comes to shove and he has to make a decision, they're very willing to sacrifice the interest of technical education on the altar of other priorities. This is the difference between endorsement and support. A guy like me understands this really well because people, what comes into my office, there are no bad ideas that come into my office. They're all good. The wacko ideas are eliminated before they get to me, believe me. So I can endorse everything people ask me to do. The problem is there's only so much money, so much energy, and so I have to prioritize. And CTE needs to be prioritized. And I ask you the question. You see, we saw this before. We need to have our leaders act like CTE is actually important, like it is a seminal issue of our time. John F. Kennedy, 1961, got up and said, we're going to the moon, and a generation of young people enlisted in science and engineering and math. John F. Kennedy was my career counselor. That's why I became an engineer. And we need to have people do this, because we are not Germany, we are not Singapore, we can't test people and slot them. We need to jawbone them into these things, and that's why leadership and all of you are important. You need not only to walk the talk, like match your curriculum with industry, get career counseling, but you need to talk the walk and act like these jobs and talk like these jobs are not consolation prizes, but are the national priority, the national calling, which has delivered us all these years. So I have a question. The question for me is this. You know, corporate taxes. You ever read about corporate taxes? Believe me, in my days, I'm going to give you another parallel to what I would say in Vietnam. Corporate taxes are goofed up to a fare-thee well. You can imagine what I would have said in Vietnam. Right? They are goofed up. Believe you may not agree, but I can tell you they are driving the wrong behavior. They're doing the wrong thing. But I will tell you for sure that my interest in corporate taxes pales in comparison to my interest in upskilling the American workforce. I prioritize upskilling the American workforce to anything like corporate taxes. I meant it when I said it's the seminal issue of the day, of our time. Now, you're all CTE people, you're all education people. Do you believe it's the most important thing? Are you willing to support career and technical education and the upskilling of America to the perhaps detriment or passing by or to the sacrifice of other social issues or other financial issues? If you are not, I don't know how we can move forward. That's a question for you. See, because I believe it's the most important thing we can do. I hope you do too. So that's my remarks. This is a great country, but we are challenged. We are challenged in a global competition for jobs. And the greatest weapon we have is the upskilling in the American workforce, education, and CTE. What we need to do is call in the airstrikes and match our curriculum to what industry needs. We need to be able to answer the question in the affirmative. We believe in careers, not necessarily education. We need to work with organizations like NC3. We need to raise these careers from a consolation prize, and we need to convince the students that they are important to them. People like UTI, who acts like their graduates are the best and they equip them with the best equipment possible. We need to convince these students. And I will tell you that the view of these jobs as the consolation prize transcends geography from urban to country, and economics, from high economics to low economics. People still view them as the consolation prize. You need to work very hard through career counseling and your own thought, word, and deed to convince the students that that's not the case. And then finally, you need to answer the question, do you believe this is the seminal issue of your time? And you need to act. I ask you to act and speak of these jobs as a national calling, because that is just what they are. You see, people looking forward are trying to find out where we're going and what we're doing, and they have questions about the future. I say this: if you look at who America is, if you look at who America has been and how we've generated the society we enjoy, if you look forward, the American workforce is not the question. The American workforce is the answer, and you hold the power to unlocking it. I feel, as a student of careers, I feel that you have chosen noble careers, careers that make a difference. And there can't be anything better than that, and so for that, you have my congratulations. As an American, I really do believe that what you do decides our future, and there would be no path to ongoing American prosperity without your success at what you do, and for that you have my admiration. And for allowing me to be here at the Pathways Conference once again, an important conference, an effort which I believe in wholeheartedly. And just to be here for a few hours and spend time with you and share in your energy and contribute to this effort, you have my thanks. Have a great conference.